Hey there, Human Geography. Mr. Castler here, and today we're going to be talking about the historic diffusion of languages. Now, this is an important video, not just because it covers the diffusion of languages, but also because it sets up a lot of basic history that you'll need to know for other things, not just in this class, but also in other social studies classes. So, first, let's get to the supposed origins of Indo-European. Now, there are two major theories on where the Indo-European language, because remember, each family was originally a language in and of itself before it branched off into many others. Anyway, Indo-European was possibly a language spoken by two different groups, so those are the two major theories. There's the nomadic warrior theory and there's the sedentary farmer theory, and they are exactly what they sound like. What you should know, though, is kind of where they came from and what, in general, the theory is. So first, the nomadic warrior theory. This is the idea that there was a nomadic warrior group, or a group of warriors on horseback, who came through India and Europe and conquered or controlled a bunch of places and thereby spread their languages, or their language, which then through distance became different languages. So that's the nomadic warrior theory. And you should note on that slide there what the time period is. So it's about 1,500 years, about 1.5 millennia to spread the language where it went. The second major theory is the sedentary farmer theory, which again is exactly what it sounds like. The theory is that the Indo-European language came from a group of farmers who, as their population grew through agriculture, needed more land, and so they expanded much more slowly than the nomadic warrior theory, expanded out throughout India and Europe and took their language with them. So again, you look at the time period on that, and you've got about 3,000 years. It took about twice as long in that particular theory to spread Indo-European. Okay, so those are your origins of the Indo-European family theories. Cool. Let's move on to the more specific stuff, the stuff that we know for certain, and the basis of a lot of the major things that went on throughout history and the basis of those languages. Starting with Latin. Latin, just like you would imagine, the Latin language came through the Roman Empire. And it was when, at Rome's furthest extent, as you can see in the map there, at Rome's furthest extent, they controlled most of Europe, much of the Middle East, and a fair amount of Northern Africa. And Latin was the lingua franca that they used to unite all those various and disparate groups of people. Now, once the Roman Empire fell in 410, 476, the countries of Europe split up into their own ethnicities, their own groups, their own kingdoms, but all of which who went back to speaking their original languages. But because they had been somewhat loosely united under the Roman Empire, they continued to use Latin as a lingua franca, especially since basically everybody in Europe was Catholic. The Catholic Church used Latin as a lingua franca. And so therefore, if you wanted to communicate with each other for power, for economy, that kind of stuff, you would use Latin. So that's where you get, like you see on the map, Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian. You also have Romansh in Switzerland. You have Romanian in Romania, and so on and so forth. A bunch of other Romance languages coming from that. So that's Latin. Okay, now let's move into the spread. Now that we've got Europe kind of set, let's move into the spread of Indo-European languages throughout the world. And that was done, as you probably already know, through European colonization or colonialism and imperialism, which is to say European countries went out throughout the world and took over lots of different places, either through economic control or by settlements, that kind of thing, and used them for their resources and used the peoples, their subjugated peoples, as labor and things like that. With that, they often spread their languages through force or economic power. And when I say that, they either forced people to speak their languages, like a lot of French-speaking countries in Africa speak French because the French forced them to, or through economic control. So British or English was spread through economic control. If you wanted to be able to talk to the rich people, you needed to be able to speak English. So the English didn't necessarily force people to speak British, but if you wanted to be able to communicate in the language of power, then you learned English. All right, and you can see in that map that the vast majority of colors on that map are European powers. The majority, not all. You see China is in there and the Ottoman Empire. Those are not European, but the rest of the colors are European powers. All right, moving on. Let's go to the next, which is Arabic. And the spread of Arabic came with the spread of the Muslim empire, starting in the 600s and 700s, or really like going into full swing in the 700s. And they took over basically the central portion of essentially the known world, or the world at the time, which is Southwest Asia and Northern Africa. And as they conquered over there into Northern Africa and Northwest Africa, they crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and took over Spain as well. By the way, kind of funny, it took them about 20 years to take over all of Spain, and took the Spanish about 700 years to get it back. So in other words, Spain and Portugal were heavily influenced by Muslims. That's where you hear about the Moors, the Spanish Moors, Moors. Those were Spanish Muslims. You see also on the map that the different colors represent kind of the different phases of expansion of Islam. Now, as Islam, the religion, expanded, it was carried through the language of Arabic. So Arabic spread as the lingua franca throughout all of those areas. By the way, just in case you didn't know it, Islam is the religion. Muslim is someone who practices the religion. So it's just like, it's kind of like Christianity and Christian. You get Islam and Muslim. Okay. Moving on, that's Arabic. We'll move into Swahili now. Swahili is an interesting one. The spread of Swahili as a lingua franca came through essentially the migration of the Bantu peoples, that is the various disparate groups of loosely linked ethnicities throughout sub-Saharan Africa, and those are the Bantu peoples. And they brought with them and spread into multiple different Bantu languages. So this map shows just where the Bantu peoples migrated. Swahili is a little bit different, however. Swahili is based on some of those original Bantu languages, but includes also European elements and a whole bunch of Arabic elements. So it's kind of a creolized language, and it's used as a lingua franca to unite all of those very unique and different ethnicities throughout that area of Eastern Africa. So the Arabic and the European influences on the language came through colonialism as well. The Muslims colonized that part of Africa, and some European powers colonized that part of Africa and encouraged the use of Swahili because it was already there as kind of a lingua franca. Both the Muslims and the Christian Europeans used Swahili to spread their religions throughout those areas. So actually those areas today are still somewhat Muslim and still somewhat Christian. It's their own, it's a different kind of brand of Christian called Coptic. All right, right. Swahili is a little bit different or unique in that it is almost entirely lingua franca. There are only about 16 million people in the world who speak Swahili as a native language, but even then it's not necessarily a native language. And by the way, that's in Tanzania. In Tanzania, most of the people speak English as well, so it's still kind of a lingua franca. Swahili is still kind of a lingua franca. But all of those areas there speak Swahili as a lingua franca so that they can communicate with each other and all of the different ethnicities that are throughout those countries. There are multiple ethnicities in all of those countries, just so you know. All right, we got two more. Russian. Russian is pretty simple and very similar to the Europeans. As Russia became an empire, it spread the use of Russian throughout its empire. It required people to speak Russian as a sign of power, really, and kind of subjugation of the various peoples there. And it's still today, and it was definitely used as a national symbol or a unifying symbol when Russia was the USSR, that is the Soviet Union. So you see all of those green countries there were part of the Soviet Union and therefore still see widespread use of Russian as a lingua franca, if not as their native language. Cool. Oh, and those areas, just so you know, you should know those areas. Eastern Europe, pretty simple. Central Asia, that's what you might refer to as the stands, but also our first introduction to the Caucasus down there, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia. Good, the Caucasus. All right, let's move on to the last one that we need to talk about, which is Mandarin. Mandarin is the official language of China, even though there are many different languages spoken throughout China. Mandarin is the official spoken language to try to unite the people so that they can all communicate with each other. And as China expands as an economic power, they're also expanding their economic power throughout Southeast Asia. What they're doing is actually really pretty clever. And this is basically current. What they're doing is really pretty clever. Because they're communist and they kind of have the ability to, they are exporting their own people. They essentially send their people to live in those various different countries throughout Southeast Asia. And the government of China tasks their people who are being exported with marrying someone of the local culture and teaching them Mandarin and having kids who speak Mandarin. So therefore, their language, that Mandarin language, becomes very important if those countries want to be able to communicate with China as the economic power in the area. It's really pretty clever. Okay. So like it says there, as China's influence in Southeast Asia spreads, so does the use of Mandarin, because their influence spreads and so more people want to speak Mandarin to try to get along with them. But also as their language spreads, so does their influence, because the more people who speak Mandarin, the more people are able to communicate with them or feel that they have a part of China. Okay, that is the historical diffusion of many of your lingua francas of the world. You should know those, and you should also see that a lot of those link to culture more deeply than just in language and to religion specifically. All right, thanks. Let me know, as always, in email or on Classroom what questions you have. Talk to y'all later.